Imagine living in your own country but being treated like a stranger, your culture suppressed, and your people divided for nearly 350 years. This is what the British did to India. But our fight for freedom was fierce, brave, and unforgettable. Today, I'll take you through the 5 phases of British rule in India and show how, despite their efforts, our spirit remained unbroken. We are diving into the era when foreign powers, led by the cunning British colonizers, stepped into our land, exploited our resources, and tried to strip away our identity, culture, and traditions. But through centuries of struggle, resistance, and sacrifice, India stood tall and reclaimed her freedom. This story is not just about colonization, but about bravery, unity, and our undying spirit. Let's journey from the 1600 to 1947 through the highs and lows of our fight for independence. So the story begins in the year 1600. At that time, India was a land of immense wealth, silks, spices, jewels, and more. Adventurous English traders representing the British East India Company arrived with a singular goal: colonization masked as trade. These men weren't initially interested in ruling. They wanted to buy and sell, focusing on spices and textiles. But India wasn't just an easy place to trade. There were already powerful kingdoms and other European traders like the Portuguese and the French, who also wanted a share of the riches. Soon enough, they saw the potential to control India for their own gain. The British set up trading posts in places like Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Kolkata. For over a century, they focused mainly on trade, making deals with local rulers. But in 1757, the Battle of Plassey changed everything. The British East India Company, led by Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal, marking the beginning of British colonization and dominance over India. After the Battle of Plassey, the British East India Company was no longer just a trading group. It became the ruler. This was the time when the British truly began to colonize and exploit India. They sought to rule and suppress the Indian culture over time. They expanded their control, often using deceit, divide and rule, and military power. They defeated several Indian rulers, bringing large parts of India under their control. Brave fighters like Rani Lakshmi, Tantia, Tope, and many others stood up to them. Yet the British continued their exploitation. The British introduced modern education. This was not to educate us, but it was to break our traditional systems and weaken our cultural values. They wanted to raise a generation of Indians who would think and act like British citizens, forgetting their roots. It was a systematic attack on our identity as Indians. Their policies drained India's wealth, forced farmers into poverty by collecting high taxes, and compelled Indian soldiers called Sipahis to fight for them. But by the mid-1800s, the first major revolt against this exploitation was brewing. The anger that had been simmering for decades finally exploded in 1857. In 1857, the rebellion began. Indian Sipahis, led by brave leaders like Mangal Pandey, revolted against the British. This was because they were being forced to use cartridges coated with pig and cow fat, which was against their religious beliefs. This incident opened the eyes of many Indians to the true nature of British cruelty. The rebellion, although eventually crushed, made it clear that Indians would no longer tolerate British exploitation. After the rebellion, the British Crown took direct control of India and the era of company rule ended. India officially became part of the British Empire. But this only worsened things. The British, one of the cruelest strategies was the divide and rule policy to pit different communities against each other, ensuring they remained in power. They tightened their control and ignored Indian demands. During this time, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre of 1990 showed exposed the extent of British cruelty to maintain control. Hundreds of unarmed Indians were brutally killed by Indian Sipahis following the orders of British officers. This was one of the darkest chapters of British rule, where they manipulated Indian soldiers into turning against their own brothers and sisters. This massacre wasn't just about killing, it was about crushing the spirit of resistance. But instead, it strengthened the resolve of freedom fighters across the nation. As the British tightened their control over India, our desire for freedom intensified. The British, known for their cunning and crooked mindset, continued to suppress our people through manipulation and division. But Indians were starting to unite in their fight for independence. Leaders across India began to rally the people, encouraging them to fight for their freedom. Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose, Chandrasekhar Azad and many others rose to challenge the British Empire. The British continued to impose harsh taxes, exploit resources and oppress Indians. But they were no longer ruling over a submissive population. Indians were now fully aware of British intentions, and the fight for independence became more focused and organized. By the 1930s, the world was changing, and so was India. After World War I, the British truly began to fear the strength of Indian soldiers. They saw the bravery of our warriors during the war and realized that armed Indians could be a threat. This fear made them more cautious, and they decided to limit access to weapons for Indians, fearing a revolt. The nationalist movement grew stronger with each passing year. The British tried to weaken us by offering small concessions, but their real aim was always to divide and control. They knew the only way to keep India under their rule was by playing on our divisions. But despite their efforts, the dream of independence never died. As we approached the 1940s, the British Empire was no longer as powerful as it was once. World War II drained their resources and the British faced major losses. They could no longer sustain their empire, and India, empowered by the efforts of countless freedom fighters, were ready to break free. Movements like the Quit India movement shook the British administration to its core, and the British government realized that keeping India would cost them more than letting it go. Finally, on August 15, 1947, after years of struggle, India gained independence. However, the victory came with a heavy price. Partition, millions were displaced, and the country was divided into India and Pakistan, a tragic outcome of divide and rule. The British may have left India in 1947, but the scars of their rule remain. Some argue that British left behind railways, schools, and modern infrastructure. But remember, long before the British, India was a prosperous and self-sufficient civilization. The railways and modern education they brought were for their own convenience and control. They drained our wealth and left us divided, their only lasting contribution. The mindset of divide and rule, a strategy that fractured our nation. But despite their best efforts, India's spirit was never crushed. We rose, we fought, and we won. Today we stand united, proud of our heritage, and free from the chains of colonization. Thank you for watching and joining me in this journey through India's fight for freedom. This story reminds us of the strength, bravery, and patriotism of our ancestors. But now, dear viewers, it's time for you to reflect. What do you think about the British colonization of India? How do you feel about the divide and rule policy that sowed the seeds of division among us? Do you think the so-called modernization the British brought was truly for India's benefit or just to exploit our resources? How do you view the sacrifice of our freedom fighters? What emotions does that stir in you? Could India have achieved independence earlier if we united sooner? And most importantly, how do you see this chapter of history shaping the future of our nation? I have shared my side of the story, but now it's your turn. What's your opinion? Let me know in the comments. I won't let you leave without telling me how you feel about this. Don't just watch and move on. This is your history, your story, and it deserves to be discussed. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Stay curious and keep asking questions. Let the fire of patriotism